Hello and welcome to Astrology with Zeke. So in this series on historical figures, this episode is going to be on Elizabeth I of England. So I don't believe that I really have to go over who she was. She founded the Elizabethan era of in English history. She was the first successful female monarch of England, although not the first female monarch. And probably one of the most notable things about her is she was also known as the Virgin Queen, as she never married and therefore produced no heirs. So, yeah, we're just going to go ahead and get into her chart because there's quite a bit to go over. I think y'all will find it fascinating. So for her chart, I'm just going to go ahead and go over just what sticks out to me the most first. So Elizabeth is a Capricorn rising, and what that means is what was most apparent about her, how she solved problems, is she did it in a way that a Capricorn would, which is to say that her appearance, demeanor, embodied the spirit of old man winter. You know, very reserved, but ambitious, hardworking, deeply dedicated, and all about that long-term result, long-term goal. So her chart ruler is Saturn, and funnily enough, it's not well placed. It's not in a good house, or a good sign rather. It is in Cancer, which means her Saturn was in detriment. And with it being in the seventh house, which is the house of marriage, one-on-one partnerships, and known enemies, that just is kind of par for the course of someone who would have issues within marriage. In her case, obviously, she just never did get married despite having a number of suitors. I think this is further accentuated by the fact that her Saturn is making a conjunction to Uranus, which is all about extremes and disruptions. So for a monarch to not get married and therefore not produce heirs was a big deal, and that would be an extreme. So to my mind, that makes sense and is probably one of the most apparent things about her. The other thing that is kind of interesting is one of the big reasons why it is speculated why she never married in the first place is because since she was a woman, had she gotten married, the person who would have had the real power would have been whoever her husband was, and chances were that person would have been wouldn't have been English, so you would have effectively been giving power of the throne over to a foreigner. So it just kind of seems to me like this is a way for her to retain power, and just a very calculated move. But what's interesting to me is her Saturn is making a square to her Mercury in Libra. And what's funny about that is Libra is, you know, all about harmony, justice, fairness, preserving a balance. And that just seems very odd, right? Choosing to not get married and potentially jeopardizing your country by not producing an heir. But what's also interesting is her decision to not get married was also an incredibly decisive one. And one thing that you should note about is with Libras, especially I would say Mercury in Libra, is they tend to be the type of person who can see all sides of any given subject and can be indecisive. So that's a pretty interesting square. Moving on, we'll probably go over her sun next, as she was a Virgo sun, and it's related to her Mercury, even though there's no aspects being made. What is interesting about her sun is it is in the eighth house and it is a part of a T-square. It's, making that opposition to Neptune in second house Pisces, and both of those planets are making the square to Jupiter in Sagittarius 12th house. So this is a really interesting T-square because Jupiter 12th house, typically 12th house placements aren't great. But I think this is one of the rare cases where this one actually works. Because even though the 12th house has to do with like places of isolation, institutions, and self-defeating behaviors. I mean, Sagittarius is really an optimistic sign. And Jupiter's domiciled there. It's the sign of the person who's always looking on the horizon, the eternal optimist, the free thinker, the explorer. And one thing that I will say about Elizabeth I is there are historians out there who will say she wasn't actually that great of a queen. Rather, she just happened to get lucky a lot. And personally, I don't think that's too fair of a judgment. But I do have to hand it to him. I do believe she was really lucky. I do believe, she had an angel on her shoulder, so to speak. She had ancestor guardians watching out for her and really helping her out. It just speaks to me that there was just that she was innately a lucky person. Because what's interesting is these squares are hard, and her sun in the 8th house, with it being in Virgo, and the sun, which is the sign of the Virgin, kind of tells me that she had issues with sexuality, perhaps opening herself up. And with it being opposed to Neptune in second house, which second house is the house about money. Pisces is a sign of self-undoing. What that tells me is she was probably subject to a lot of deception, a lot of people lying to her, pulling the wool over her eyes, or at least trying to. And that's an interesting opposition because a Virgo sun tends to be all about the small details and are known for being highly analytical. But I think this is a square because it's like none of the negative parts of her really affected her. So yeah, I would say that's my interpretation of that. In a strange way, the T-square I don't think is nearly as hard as it looks. I think she came out on top more often than not. In fact, more often than not, any square to Jupiter tends to not be that big of a deal. Interestingly enough, her Jupiter is making a sextile to her Mercury, which just kind of goes into her being highly intelligent, and even with her being indecisive at times, it was like her luck always won out and gave her the time to come to a decisive decision. So, with that out of the way, let's move on. She will go to her moon. So she was a Taurus moon, which is in the 3rd house, which is the house of your neighborhood, early childhood. And typically, this would mean that she had a pretty good childhood, very stable, emotionally grounded. However, this is making a square to Pluto in Aquarius 1st house. Now, I'm going to touch on some sensitive topics. I'll just touch on them, but I kind of have to talk about them in order to really get into, because I think it explains further why Elizabeth had issues with marrying men, or the idea of marrying a man, despite the pressures of her office. So in a lot of her childhood, first, let's get the first thing out of the way. She was declared illegitimate by the Pope as a child. And for many of you may know that her mother, Anne Boleyn, was executed by her father. So that's not indicative of a healthy childhood. what it says is a lot of her personhood was controlled by other people. She was subject to the control of other people who had their own plans for her, their own ideas for her, even though a lot of her needs, basic needs, were taken care of. So she didn't necessarily need to worry about it, but she had next to no say over anything. And what's more creepy, and I'll just touch on this one, is for early adolescence, she was under the custody of her stepmother, who was, at the time, this was after her father's death. Her stepmother, Catherine Parr, was married to her half-brother's uncle. And there was stuff that went on between that man and Elizabeth that looked like that is textbook grooming, if you catch my drift. I won't go too deeper into that. And unfortunately, it looks like the stepmother did not intervene soon enough, or at least as soon as she should have. So if you want to look into that more on your own, by all means, go for it. For obvious reasons, I don't want to go into details, but there you go. So for me personally, I think that probably kind of explains some extreme hesitancy to get married to a man who would have power over her, even though she was the one in the position of power. And I think this is further evidenced by the ruler of her Pluto, which is Saturn. And oh, would you look at that? It's in the 7th house. And interestingly enough, the ruler of her Saturn is the moon, which is in the 3rd house. So that's just something I wanted to point out. That's something that I found interesting. Another thing that I noticed is the ruler of her moon is Venus, which is in Libra. That is also in the 8th house, which is not just the house of sorrows, but it can have to do with sexuality as well. So even though Venus is domicile in Libra and technically it's making good aspects, it is making a trine to Pluto. And given the stuff I talked about with her childhood, given the fact that there was a lot of people throughout her life who either tried to control her or actually tried to kill her throughout her life, I just think that gave her serious issues over her personhood, her sense of self, and up to and including things of a sexual nature. So that's all I'm going to discuss about that. It's a delicate topic, but it's right there, so I felt the need to bring it up. Anyways, the one interesting thing that I will say about Elizabeth I, and I think is just highly appropriate, is her North Node is also in the 7th house, right at the end of the 7th house, just before the 8th. And it's in Leo, which of course is ruled by the sun, which is the self. And what that kind of tells me in an odd way is she's married to herself, or more likely married to her office. And that's what she was moving towards, is developing a relationship with the office of the Queen of England, what that meant, and how that, and you could also say that perhaps her husband was the people of England, you know. So there you go. The last thing I want to talk about is that I found interesting is her natal Mars, which is in the 5th house. So Mars is, you know, your drive, ambition, how you assert yourself. And it's in the 5th house in Gemini, which tells me she was probably a very competitive person, but competitive with wits. I think she loved outsmarting people, and which she did frequently her entire life, because I think a lot depended on her coming out on top. And given the fact she was a woman in the time she was born, that's all she had. So I think she was someone who's incredibly adept at that. And interestingly enough, it does make a really nice trine to both her Venus and Mercury and Libra. So even though she could be indecisive, like if you look at a number of her foreign policy decisions earlier in her rule, she appeared to be quite moderate and did a lot of things to try to put off war. Some people may say she was probably playing it too conservatively, but personally, this tells me that she was a lot smarter than people give her credit for. And I don't think she was nearly as indecisive as people try to make her out to be. I just think she was an incredibly careful person, and just like to take things slow and see things as they are. That way, she's just better at outfoxing her opponents, you know. So that's what that tells me. Anyways, so yeah, I think that's gonna about do it for Elizabeth. Anyway, so that was pretty interesting. Again, if you want to get more details on the sensitive topic that I mentioned, go ahead and look into it on your own. And I think you'll come to the same conclusions as I did. But yeah, if there's any other historical figures you would like me to do, go ahead and leave a name in the comments, and I'll check them out. Also, I do readings professionally, so you can go ahead and check out my website and book my services. I'll leave a link to my website in the description below. Anyways, that'll about do it for today, and we'll see you all next time.